This is a LSD trip report by Faeden, posted to arrow.org on August 4th, 2005. I was 20 years old when the night happened. I had spent most of my teenage years in a world of fights, illegal parties, and drugs. I moved in a circle that liked to test limits. I fought in street gangs, I sold small amounts of substances, I went to raves that never had a permit. I thought I was strong. I thought I could handle anything that came my way. I had tried many substances, but I had never tried LSD. My friends talked about it a lot. Some of them were university students. They came from families that could afford good education. They liked to read about philosophy, about metaphysics, about parallel dimensions, about time travel, about God. I listened to them while I smoked weed and drank cheap cider. I did not think about spirituality. I thought about power, about respect, about survival. One night we were in a small room at a student's house. The house had no electricity. We lit a few candles and sat on the floor. The candles gave a soft orange light that made the walls flicker. The room smelled of wax and stale beer. I was sitting on a worn couch with 3 friends. One of them, Colin, was studying psychology. Another, Marcus, liked to talk about shamanic rituals. The third, Luis, liked to experiment with chemicals. I felt like the odd one out. I did not have a degree. I did not have a job. I felt like the poor kid who was trying to keep up with them. They had been using LSD for weeks. Some of them had taken it for months. They described the experience as opening a hidden part of the mind. They said it could show you other realities. They said it could make you see the soul of the world. I was curious. I was also scared. I had heard stories about bad trips. I had seen a friend just a few weeks before have a terrifying experience. I remembered the way his eyes rolled back, the way he screamed, the way his body shook. That made me nervous, but it also made me want to see for myself what they were talking about. I wanted to be accepted by them. I wanted to be able to join their deep conversations about God and time. I wanted to prove that I could handle it. I asked Luis to get me a dose. He smiled and said, "You will get a microdot." He gave me a tiny blue tablet. It was the most potent form of LSD that was available at the time. I knew it was strong, but I told myself I could manage. I did not think about the fact that I was about to take a substance that could change my perception of reality. I placed the tablet on my tongue. The taste was bitter, like metal. I swallowed it quickly. I had a liter of cider in my hand. I drank it all at once. The cider was acidic. It burned my throat a little. I felt the liquid run down my chest. I sat back down on the couch and tried to act normal. I looked at the flickering candles. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, but I told myself it was just the light. The first 15 minutes passed without anything noticeable. I felt a little warm, but I thought it was just the cider. I watched the flame on the candle. It danced. I thought about the conversation we had earlier about time. I tried to remember the exact time on my watch. My analog watch showed a normal face. My digital watch on Marcus's wrist showed 8888. No one answered. At 30 minutes, I still felt the same. I was still smiling, still talking about the music we had heard earlier that night. I thought the trip would start later. I did not notice any change in my breathing. I was still breathing normally. At 45 minutes, I began to notice that the shadows on the wall were not moving in the same way as the candle flame. They seemed to have a life of their own. They stretched and contracted. I felt a small tingling on my skin, as if the air itself was touching me. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just being paranoid. At about 1 hour after I swallowed the tablet, something shifted. Marcus, who had been sitting in a wooden chair, turned his head toward me. He stared at me with a serious expression. He said, "Are you in the Twilight Zone yet?" The words sounded strange in the quiet room. As he spoke, the room seemed to melt. The walls appeared to soften like wax under a hot lamp. The candlelight spread across the surface of the walls in a way that made the shadows look like they were breathing. I felt the sounds in the room as a vibration on my skin. The low hum of the refrigerator in the next room felt like a warm wave on my arms. I was still thinking with a clear mind, but my eyes were seeing things that were not there. I told my friends, "I can handle this. It is weird, but I can handle it." I tried to stay calm. I wanted to prove that I could stay in control. The conversation turned to the nature of time on LSD. Louise said, "When you are on LSD, time does not exist. Distance does not exist. You cannot judge how far something is." I laughed. "I can still look at my watch," I said. I lifted my analog watch and looked at the face. The hour hand had split into many thin lines. There were about 20 hands pointing in different directions. I could not read the time. I looked at Marcus' digital watch. The numbers were all Faeden. I asked, "What time is it?" He tried to answer, but his voice faded as he spoke. It was as if a static noise covered his words. The other friends tried to speak, but their voices also became muffled at the moment they tried to give me the time. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I could not understand what was happening. I felt my heart beat faster. I decided to stand up. I walked toward the door. As I stepped into the hallway, the atmosphere changed. The warm candlelit room became dark and oppressive. The shadows on the walls turned into shapes that looked like creatures. I could hear low growls coming from the darkness. The floorboards beneath my feet seemed to wobble. I felt as if the wood was giving way. I imagined the floor falling away to reveal fire underneath. I could see orange flames licking at the edges of the hallway. I began to pull at my hair, clenching my fists. My mind was racing. I could not understand why the room was turning into a nightmare. Colin saw my distress. He rushed to my side. He tried to calm me. He said, "Breathe. It is just the drug. It will pass." He put his arm around my shoulders. My mind misinterpreted his arm as a snake. I flinched and tried to push him away. I felt a surge of fear that made me want to scream. I could not control my breathing. I felt my chest tighten. Someone shouted, "For God's sake, help him!" I did not know who said it. It sounded like a voice from the darkness. I could not see anyone else. I felt a sudden pressure on my scalp, as if someone was pulling at my hair in clumps. I could not remember pulling my hair, but I felt the sensation of it being ripped out. Colin managed to get me out of the hallway. He guided me toward the front door. The night air outside was cool. The moment I stepped outside, the oppressive feeling lessened. The darkness gave way to a sky full of stars. The air smelled of wet grass and distant traffic. The candlelight was gone, replaced by the soft glow of street lamps. The world seemed to sparkle. I could see tiny points of light on the leaves of a nearby tree. I still felt scared, but the fear was not as intense as it had been inside the house. Colin stayed close to me. He spoke in a low voice, trying to keep me grounded. He said, "Look at the sky. Focus on the light." I looked up. The sky was a deep blue, dotted with stars. I could see the moon, a thin crescent hanging low. I felt a strange sensation of my skin tingling, as if the air itself was alive. We walked down the street. The other friends followed behind us, keeping a distance. They seemed concerned, but also curious. They did not want me to be alone in that dark hallway again. They thought the candlelit room was the source of the worst visions. I could feel the pavement under my shoes. It was cold, but the cold felt pleasant. My breath formed small clouds in the night air. We stopped near an alley. The alley was dark, with a thin line of light at the far end. I could see two dark shapes huddled together, whispering. My mind immediately labeled them as demons. I felt a surge of dread. The shadows that had been on the walls of the bedroom seemed to follow me, now surrounding me in the alley. They made low, growling sounds, like the sound of a dog in the distance. I felt a pressure on my chest, as if the shadows were pressing against me. Colin noticed my panic. He said, "Think of God." As he spoke, a white mist rose from the ground at my feet. It was soft and luminous. It rose up, touching my face, my arms, my legs. It felt cool and soothing. The mist seemed to dissolve the shadows. The dark figures in the alley vanished. I looked up and saw a silver stairway that seemed to rise from the ground and disappear into the night sky. It looked like a stairway to a higher place. My mind told me to climb it. I felt a strong urge to step onto the steps, even though my feet were still on the grass. I began to lift my leg as if I were stepping onto the first rung. My friends laughed. They saw me stomping on the grass, moving my legs as if I were climbing. My legs felt heavy, as if I were walking up an incline that was not there. I could not see any actual steps. I was convinced that I was climbing. My body swayed. I felt light, as if I could float. I could hear my own breathing, loud and steady. Colin tried to bring me back. He said, "Forget what you see. Focus on the breath." He then spoke about a concept from his class. He talked about the balance of light and darkness. He said that both are equal and that we must accept them. He said that we cannot control what we see, but we can accept it. As he talked, I felt a calm settle over me. The shadows and the stairway faded, merging together into a single pattern. The pattern spread across everything I could see. The trees around us began to swirl with colors. The leaves turned shades of violet, green, orange, and pink all at once. The clouds above the moon spun slowly, showing bright hues. The night sky looked like a moving painting. I could feel the colors vibrating in the air. They seemed to have a weight. My thoughts felt solid, as if they had mass. I could sense that my thoughts were connected to the world around me. I could hear the rustle of the leaves, as if each leaf were a tiny voice speaking in a language that my mind could understand without translation. The sound was not a whisper, but a solid pulse that I could feel in my chest. The pulse matched the beat of my heart, and my heart seemed to beat in time with the light that moved across the sky. I could feel the weight of the colors pressing against my skin, like a gentle pressure that made my muscles relax even as my mind raced. The stairway that had appeared earlier began to dissolve into a river of light that flowed upward and outward at the same time. I could see the river as a line of pure white that split into many strands, each strand a different hue. The strands wrapped around the trees, around the clouds, around the moon, and then wrapped around me. I could feel the strands touching my arms, my shoulders, my face. The touch was warm, like the heat of a candle, but it did not burn. It was a calm heat that made my skin tingle. I could sense that my thoughts were no longer separate from the world. When I thought of the wind seemed to respond. When I thought of the sound of a distant car, the car's engine roared in my ears as if it were right next to me. I could feel the sound of my own breathing as a physical object, a thin line of mist that rose from my lips and disappeared into the night. The mist glowed faintly, matching the colors around me. The feeling of connection grew stronger. I could feel the presence of the people around me, not just as bodies, but as extensions of the same light. Their laughter became a series of bright flashes that bounced off the trees and returned to me as a soft hum. Their words turned into shapes that floated in front of my eyes, each shape a different color. I could see the shape of the word peace as a soft blue circle that expanded and contracted with each breath I took. At the height of the experience, a wave of understanding rose inside me. It was not a single thought, but a flood of many thoughts at once. I could see the idea of balance as a scale made of light, each side holding equal amounts of color. One side held dark violet, the other side held bright orange. The scale did not tip. It stayed still, and I felt a calm settle over everything. The calm was not an absence of feeling, but a deep, steady presence that made the chaotic colors feel ordered. I tried to put the flood of thoughts into words. I opened my mouth and felt the words forming, but they slipped away before they could leave my throat. It was as if my tongue was trying to catch a fish that kept swimming faster than I could reach. The frustration was sharp, like a sudden cold wind that cut through the warm light. I could feel the frustration as a sharp point in my chest, but it did not hurt. It simply reminded me that some things are not meant to be spoken. The people around me noticed my struggle. Colin, the friend who had spoken about yin and yang, placed his hand on my shoulder. His hand felt solid, like a stone that had been warmed by the sun. He spoke in a low voice, and his voice turned into a series of low tones that vibrated through the floor. I could feel the vibrations as a gentle rocking motion that steadied the wave of thoughts inside me. His words were simple. Accept what you see. Let it be. The simplicity of the statement cut through the flood and allowed a small part of the water to settle. As the peak began to soften, the colors did not disappear but became smoother. The violet, green, orange, and pink that had swirled around the trees blended into a soft gradient that covered the entire landscape. The clouds above the moon continued to spin, but now their spin was slower, like a record playing at a lower speed. The night sky remained a moving painting, but the brushstrokes were broader and less frantic. The feeling of my thoughts having mass remained. I could still feel each thought as a small object that I could move with my mind. When I focused on the idea of a tree, the tree in front of me seemed to grow taller, its branches reaching higher into the sky. When I thought of a stone, a small pebble appeared at my feet, warm to the touch, and then dissolved into light. The ability to shape the world with thought gave me a sense of power, but it also reminded me of responsibility. I could not create chaos without feeling the weight of the resulting imbalance. The plateau lasted for several hours. During this time, the world around me felt alive in a way I had never known. The grass beneath my feet seemed to breathe, each blade expanding and contracting in rhythm with my breathing. The insects that flitted about were not just insects, they were tiny lights that flickered in and out of existence. Their flight patterns formed simple geometric shapes that I could follow with my eyes. When I followed a shape, it would change color, and I could feel a tiny surge of joy each time the color shifted. I noticed that my emotions were also colored. Joy was a bright yellow that spread across my vision like sunlight. Sadness was a deep blue that settled like a cool wave. Fear was a sharp red that prickled at the edges of my perception. When I felt fear, the red would flare, but the presence of the calm scale kept the red from overwhelming the other colors. The scale remained in my mind, a reminder that each feeling had its place. At one point, a thought about the meaning of life rose up. It was not a single sentence, but a cluster of images. A river flowing into the sea, a seed growing into a tree, a child laughing. The images were simple, yet they carried a weight that made my chest feel heavy. I reached for the words, but the words dissolved before I could hold them. I understood that the answer was not something to be spoken, but something to be lived. The night continued. The candlelight that had started the trip flickered in the distance, but its flame seemed far away now, as if it were part of a different scene. The moon, still spinning, cast a soft glow that made the colors appear even brighter. The air felt thick with the scent of pine and earth, a scent that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could breathe it in, and each breath felt like I was inhaling the whole forest. As the hours passed, the intensity of the colors began to fade gradually. The bright violet softened to a muted lavender, the green turned to a pale sage, the orange mellowed to a soft amber, and the pink became a gentle rose. The gradient that covered the sky became a single hue, a deep indigo that felt like the night itself. The weight of the colors lessened, and the feeling of my thoughts having mass became lighter, as if the objects I was holding in my mind were becoming less dense. My body began to feel heavier. The grass that had felt like a living carpet now felt like a mattress. My limbs grew tired, and I could feel the muscles in my legs wanting to rest. I sat down on a fallen log, and the log felt solid, like a piece of earth that had been waiting for me to lean on it. The log's surface was warm, and I could feel the heat of the earth rising through it. The calm that had settled during the peak remained, but it was now a quiet background hum rather than a dominant presence. I could still hear the faint sound of the river of light in my mind, but it had become a low tide that rose and fell slowly. My thoughts were still present, but they no longer felt like solid objects. They were more like clouds drifting across the sky. I could watch them without feeling the need to grasp them. The coming down was not abrupt. It was a slow easing, like a tide receding from the shore. The colors faded until the world was mostly the natural colors of night. The trees were once again just trees, the clouds were just clouds, and the moon was just the moon, though it still held a faint afterglow from the earlier spin. The sense of everything being alive remained, but it was now a softer awareness, like a background radio that could be turned up or down. My breathing became deeper, and the physical sensations of the trip lessened. My heart rate slowed, and I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I could sense the lingering warmth in my skin from the earlier heat of the colors. My muscles relaxed, and a gentle fatigue settled over me. It was a tired but contented fatigue, the kind that comes after a long walk through a forest. When the lights finally dimmed to normal night, I opened my eyes fully. The world looked the same as it had before, but I could still see a faint outline of the color gradient in my peripheral vision, as if a veil had been lifted slightly. The candlelight in the distance flickered, and its flame seemed larger than before, as if it were a reminder of the beginning of the journey. I stayed there for a long time, simply observing. I could feel the after effects of the trip in my body, a light headache, a dry mouth, and a lingering sense of openness. My mind was still quiet, but the quiet was not empty. It was filled with a sense that something had shifted inside me. I could sense that my view of the world had been altered, even though the external world had not changed.